I could feel it coming, that tightness in my chest that grew with each passing second, like an invisible hand slowly closing around my throat. My mouth opened wide, trying to catch a breath that never seemed enough. The sharp whistle of my breathing filled the room, a constant sound I couldn't silence. I was 6 years old, and this was how I fought my nightly battles against asthma, that prison that squeezed my chest and plunged me into a bottomless abyss. Doctors said it was emotional, that any crisis or disruption could trigger it, but they didn't know that for me, crises were the very air I breathed. I lived in fragmented worlds, sometimes with my father, other times with my mother, and occasionally with my grandparents. My father, a military man with a severe gaze and a voice that cracked like thunder, filled the house with a tense silence that always threatened to shatter. His fury was unpredictable, a volcano that could erupt at the slightest mistake. It wasn't enough to stay still. I had to disappear. I would hide under the bed, feeling the floor tremble beneath his steps, praying I wouldn't become the cause of his next explosion. My mother, on the other hand, always seemed absent, trapped in her own urgency. I would watch her pass by, phone in hand, conspiring with invisible voices, her face marked by constant anxiety, as if she were always on the edge of some unseen precipice. Her eyes barely met mine. Her time was a resource I was never meant to consume. With my grandparents, the scenario wasn't any better. They were like two gladiators trapped in an arena neither could escape. Their shouts echoed daily, words sharp as knives hurled without mercy. Each reproach opened fresh wounds. Their voices rose with the desperation of two souls chained together by resentment. Amid that chaos, I learned to stay silent, to vanish into the cracks of their conflict. But silence was never enough. It never was. The birth of my brother, so fragile, only intensified my guilt. I had to be invisible, silent, a shadow that asked for nothing. Every glance or gesture of attention burned like a reproach. You don't matter. Don't make a sound. In that self-imposed silence, in that suffocating solitude, I learned to hold my breath until it hurt, to fight my battles without disturbing anyone. The air wouldn't come. I felt my chest tightening, each attempt to breathe turning into a sharp whistle that pierced the darkness of the room. The effort to fill my lungs was futile. The fire of asthma spread from my throat to my stomach. I wanted to cough, to scream, but I couldn't. Every movement hurt, every passing second dragged me deeper into a silent despair. I couldn't bother anyone. The house was asleep, and the fear of waking my father, of disrupting my mother's precarious calm, was greater than my need for help. This will pass, I told myself, gritting my teeth, swallowing the tears that threatened to betray me. The whistle of my breathing was like the groan of a taut rope about to snap, and in my mind the image of a cornered prey grew more vivid. Like a cub caught in the jaws of something far larger, defenseless, exposed. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to calm myself, but then I felt it. Something changed in the air, a new density, a weight that wasn't there before. From the upper corner of the room, where the shadows converged, it began to emerge. First, two small, misshapen hands, wrinkled like dead leaves, with long black nails that seemed to grope at the void. The hands opened and closed slowly, almost as if they were feeling the air, like a predator probing its prey before pouncing. The rest of its figure revealed itself with unbearable slowness. A long, crooked nose marked by spots and dark veins jutted out from the center of its face like a spear dividing the space. That nose seemed to move with purpose, sniffing at something deeper than the air, something emanating directly from me, my fear, my weakness. Below, its mouth stretched wide, impossibly so, an abyss filled with yellow, jagged teeth, each one sharper than the last. Between them, a thick, wet tongue slid slowly, as if savoring the scent of the panic saturating the room. The creature floated, wrapped in a tattered green robe that seemed woven from shadows and dust. Its skin was a map of deep cracks, like a parched land abandoned for centuries. And atop its head rested a pointed hat, a dirty and faded pink, tilted over tufts of brittle white hair that fell like broken threads. It was impossible to look away. It didn't move hastily, but its mere presence was suffocating, as if its existence claimed all the air in the room. I was small, defenseless, trapped in that eternal moment when prey feels the hot breath of its hunter on its neck. The creature closely resembled an entity I had heard whispered about during family gatherings. The elders spoke of it in hushed tones, as if afraid to summon it by uttering its name. They said duendes were real, not just a legend, but a presence the community coexisted with in constant fear. That's why babies were baptized as soon as possible, to prevent the duende from taking them. It was described as a diminutive ancient being with a malice unfathomable, unknown to humans. It would steal unbaptized children from their beds, dragging them into the shadows beneath, never to be found again. Stories of such disappearances abounded, tales shared among acquaintances or printed in the tabloid newspapers my grandfather often read with a furrowed brow. I knew instantly that what stood before me was that, a duende. Its mouth opened slowly as if the very air recoiled from the sound of its words. They weren't human sounds, but guttural, harsh, yet in my mind they carried a cruel clarity. You are not a strong tree. You will not heal. You will not see adulthood. You will not know a woman, and misery will always follow you, between your feet and your shoes. You will not rid yourself of this, because your destiny is to suffer. You do not matter. You have no value. You have no future, and the grace of love has been denied to the one before me. I have not come to offer solutions. I have come to laugh, to mock you, and to make you know it. My body trembled. I felt a deep vibration, as if my very marrow was about to shatter, and an indescribable pressure pinned me to the bed, sinking me into the mattress as if the earth itself wanted to swallow me. The air around grew heavy, unbreathable, as though I were trapped under an invisible mountain. But this wasn't new. I already knew that feeling, that weight that pressed down on my chest, leaving me breathless, as if the entire world were collapsing around me. I had learned early on that words could hurt more than any blow. When my father got angry, he said things that didn't just hurt, they stripped something away from me, a part of myself I could never recover. You're stupid. You're worthless. Everything bad that happens is your fault. I didn't understand why he said those things, but I knew he meant them, and that was enough to convince me they were true. That's why when the duende spoke, its words fell on me with the same coldness as a rain on parched earth. I didn't feel fear, only a profound exhaustion, as though an old shadow had settled beside me to remind me of what I already knew. I closed my eyes and let the phrases sink into me without resistance, not because I was strong, but because there was nothing left to defend. This is who I am, I thought. Do what you must. Take me if you want to take me. Kill me if you want to kill me. The duende closed its mouth abruptly, its expression shifting. Something resembling disappointment crossed its face. Time is the lesser evil. Time is the predator you cannot stop. Time will carve holes in your bones and leave voids in your memory. It rubbed its hands slowly, its grotesque grimace twisting even further, like that of a gambler who expected a different outcome in a game he believed rigged in his favor. If you are fighting for your life, then there is little my presence can do. This is not what I thought it would be. You are not who I thought I would find. The creature began to fade, but before disappearing completely, it let out a slow, deep laugh. A laugh filled with certainty, like that of someone who always wins, even if not in that moment. Sick, you are of no use to me. Weak, you are of no use to me. The beauty of a dead tree lies in watching it fall when it is strongest. Before vanishing entirely, it left one final warning. I will return in a few days, but not for you, not for your sake. The payment must be made regardless. And with that, the shadows consumed it. 3 days passed, and I didn't speak of it. I told no one. Miraculously, my health improved. I could breathe with ease, and the constant exhaustion that had weighed me down vanished like a distant memory. It was as if my body had forgotten about asthma entirely, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a faint sense of calm. The usual chaos of my family was interrupted one evening by a blackout. Back then, the electric company often had issues that led to sporadic power outages, plunging the neighborhood into total darkness. Around 7 in the evening, all the lights went out, leaving the house in an unfamiliar silence. I have to admit, while the adults grumbled, I found unexpected joy in those blackouts. The darkness broke our routine. It gave us an excuse to step outside, talk to the neighbors, and play with other kids under the dim light of the stars. We all went out to confirm that we weren't the only ones affected. Upon returning, assured that the whole neighborhood was in the dark, my grandfather went to the dining room to fetch the white candles we always kept for emergencies. He lit them calmly, placing them on small porcelain plates. We gathered around the table in the living room, and there, forced by circumstance, the rare family conversations began, the kind that only happened when we were compelled to spend time together. My father wasn't home, and that brought me a strange sense of peace. In his absence, I could relax in my grandfather's company, his deep, steady voice filling the room with tales of his youth. While dipping a piece of French bread into the hot coffee my grandmother had just served, I listened, fascinated, to my grandfather's stories. Tales that seemed so distant, yet so vivid in his gestures and words. The night promised to be long and calm, full of anecdotes and laughter, when suddenly the lights came back on. The hum of electrical appliances and the noise of the street rushed back in, shattering the brief magic of the darkness. With a hint of disappointment, I got up to check that the blackout hadn't disturbed my younger brother's sleep. As I entered his room, the air seemed to stop. There on the floor lay my brother, deeply asleep, wrapped in a blanket, with half his body tucked under the bed. For a moment, I didn't know what to do. My heart raced as a chill ran down my spine. Finally, I screamed. My scream brought my mother and grandparents rushing in. My mother picked him up quickly, her hands trembling. How did he end up on the floor? It's impossible for him to have climbed out of his crib on his own, she repeated over and over, her voice breaking, her eyes wide with fear. My grandparents said nothing. They simply looked at each other, their faces pale, carrying a worry that seemed to bear the weight of centuries of unspoken knowledge. I said nothing, I just watched. I knew exactly what had happened. The words of the Duende had come to life in that moment. An exchange, a dark bargain, had been fulfilled without anyone noticing. I looked at my brother's face, his slow, steady breathing. But something was off. It wasn't the same rhythm I used to hear when we slept together. His lips seemed paler, his hands too still. Something had changed, something only I could feel, as if his essence had been replaced by something foreign. The echo of the Duende's laughter reverberated in my mind, slow and heavy, like a promise fulfilled. "The payment must be made," the shadows whispered from every corner of the room. And there it was, before me, the price of that macabre trade. And I stood in silence, feeling the weight of the inevitable pressing down on me. I couldn't tell anyone. They wouldn't believe me. That baby wasn't my brother, but I was the only one who knew it, the only one who had to carry that truth. The shadow of the Duende had vanished, but its trace remained, lingering among us, invisible and indelible. The baby remained asleep, but for me, sleep was no longer possible.